Broadcasting from the business capital of the world, this is the Podcast Business News Network.
You think about it, we all grew up with books, and books are having another moment. With all the technology, yes, you can read things on your screen, you can listen to audiobooks, it's all great, but people are actually buying physical books again. It's same thing, vinyl's back. People are listening to records. You ever think about writing your own book? We're gonna take you through that journey, and one man can help you with all of it. That journey, which includes coming up with the concept, the characters, right down to the cover, the marketing of your book, even the editing and everything that goes in between the pages. He takes care of it. NFB Publishing is his company in upstate New York. He's Mark Pogodzinski. He's back with us. Hey, Mark, how you doing?
Good. How are you doing, Steve?
Doing well, doing well. We have a guest here today invited to the party, and this is somebody that you worked with, and this is Mike Persimisco? Am I saying that right?
Yes. Yeah.
Wow, awesome. Thank you for being here, by the way.
Thank you for having me. I appreciate it.
So this book is all about fiction and interesting story. I didn't expect a lot that is going on in this book to happen, but why don't you take us, and by the way, the book is called The Dale. Before we go anywhere, what's the title mean?
The Dale is sort of a shallow dip in a part of land, and it's almost like a little valley, and it's where the most important parts of the novel occur. This little lost town at the edge of the Quabbin Reservoir in western Massachusetts. So lost little town. So that's what a Dale is.
Wow. How would you phrase this book? Yes, it's fiction, but it's also kind of suspenseful. Would you say there's a little loosely called here horror connected with this as well?
Yeah, supernatural thriller is what I would go with, is how I would categorize it. It started out as a horror novel, but the more I did research and the more work I got, started working on it, the more it became a supernatural thriller. And I think it's better for it.
Wow. I want to get to the research part in a moment, but why don't you tell everybody what the book's about?
This is a book about two things. Number one, it's about the power of um, faith and friendship in the face of incredible evil. It's about how far will you go to find the answers that you need to free yourself, but those answers can also destroy you as well. And if you're a friend, how far will you follow that person down the rabbit hole to help them find those answers? And secondly, it's about the intersection of faith and science.
Mm.
So in general, in our modern world, we expect them to be separate, but they often collide. And when it comes to the plot of the novel, it's the story of a girl who must decide if she is losing her mind, as her psychiatrist believes she is, because of a trauma when she was 13 years old, or if she's losing her soul, as her priest believes she is.
Wow. It's almost as if she's in between, being pulled from both sides.
That's correct.
Mm.
And the deeper she searches, the more she goes to that guilt, the more answers she finds, the more terrifying they become. And the more the possibilities become unfortunate and terrifying for her.
Interesting story. And there's I would have never, the fact that she it suggested that she be recommitted to a psychiatric ward, and that's at the hands of her doctor.
Correct. An interesting part about this novel is everybody believes that they're right. Everybody believes that they are doing the right thing for young Caroline Sullivan. Her psychiatrist believes she's on the edge of schizophrenia, that she's never overcome the trauma of being kidnapped at 13 and the divorce of her parents. A rather awful divorce. Her father is a successful musician, and she finds out at the beginning of one of his shows that they're getting divorced. And her priest, who has faced evil in his past, sees it. And they both believe that they have the answer to solve her problem. And of course, neither one of those answers is a good one. I'm either losing my mind or I'm losing my soul. And it's about her journey to discover which one of those is true, and how can she move on with her life with that hanging over her head.
There's so many different elements to the story. I'm even intrigued about her father being a well-known musician. Where do you come up with that? Like where that could, he could be anybody, any occupation.
It's a great question because when I was creating him, he had a much bigger role in the novel than he did originally. I'm sorry, originally he had a much larger role. I wanted a girl that had everything. I wanted a girl that would live a daydream kind of life, and then has that all taken away from her, and her world collapses. And how is it that she puts it back together and finds her way forward in the face of malevolent evil? How does she do that?
Mm.
And that's how he came to play. He became a famous musician and a successful one at the peak of his career. But he's there simply so she can have this wonderful, beautiful life that gets taken away from her like that.
Why a kidnapping? And I don't know if, if you want to share, if somebody hasn't read it yet, how that came to be.
Well, she needs to have a conflict. And the conflict in the novel is she remembers being in one place, this house on the common of the small town in Western Massachusetts where she lived growing up. But she is found in the Dale, this ruined little town that only she and her friends know about. And she can only remember being in the Dale, and I'm sorry, she can only remember being in the house on the common, but not on the Dale. And no matter how many different ways she's told this, she doesn't want to believe it. So she keeps trying to prove that she was actually at the house on the common. And that's where that comes in. So she needed that sort of center point conflict between her and the people around her.
Now she connects with her friends along this journey. And do they support her along the way?
They do, but it's questionable. Um, we all have those friends that have made questionable decisions, and it's a question of how long do you support them, how long do you believe them, how long do you have how long do you have faith in them for, how far do you go down that rabbit hole to support them. And her two best friends, William Lane and Daniel Wilson, do support her all the way to the very end of the novel, but sometimes they do have their doubts. They have their doubts like anybody else does. They have their doubts like Dr. Nash does, the psychiatrist, or Father Biquette does, the priest, and her father and their friends. They all have their doubts.
And Mark, you've published quite a few fictional books, some of them very tumultuous, like this story. What did you first think when Michael presented it to you?
Well, you can tell based on his description that he's put a lot of thought into it. It has the two things that you need for a good fiction novel. It has the creativity, but it also has a skill, as he talks about conflict and character. We talked about it before. They're almost like the book. Writing a fiction novel is faith and science, and there's a magic to it, creating a character who's going to last beyond the book when people remember after they're done reading the book. But there's also a craft to it. There's also creating that tension, that conflict, creating characters who add to the story. And I thought the conflict, central conflict, like faith versus science, was so interesting. Plus, my dad grew up in Western Massachusetts, and I know where Quabbin is. So there was that weird connection.
Wow.
If you see it in the book, it's such a strange spelling, but I was like, oh, I know where that is, and I have been there. So I thought that must mean something. So that was part of it too.
How interesting. Why wouldn't it be, Michael? Why is it not fictional, that town? Like you could have made it up, but you decided to go with a real town.
I did. So Belchertown, Massachusetts, was originally known as Cold Springs, Massachusetts, and at some point it became known as Belchertown. But I always loved the original name. And since I had lived there for 7 years when I was a kid with the Quabbin in my backyard,
Gotcha.
and those four lost towns that were buried underwater to create the Quabbin, it just made just a great setting. And it actually, the story of the Quabbin, the story of Enfield, Prescott, Dana, um, begs to be written as a piece of fiction because everybody's written about it as a nonfiction piece because it's so compelling. But this is a story of the ghosts that sort of roam around the ruins of the Quabbin that you can find really anywhere past the fire line. You walk into your backyard past the fire line, kick up the dirt a little bit, and you'll find some remainder of those towns that have been gone since 1938.
Tell us about the research that went into this book.
There was a ton. The first part of the research was just getting the story of the Quabbin down correctly. I'd read a couple different books. Michael, I think it's Songus, wrote a book, who also wrote the book The Finest Hours, that was made into a movie by Chris Pine. He wrote a book about the Quabbin. And then I did a lot of research on my own. And then for the Catholic part of it, the exorcism part of it, I had a very good friend of mine who was a Benedictine monk, and he had actually experienced these kinds of things. So I spent a lot of time talking with him about what a real exorcism looks like, not one that you would see in a movie that's glamorized, but the real ones. And the real ones are far more terrifying than anything you can see on a movie screen. And that's why the research was just so important, is because it gave credibility to the story. And that's, yeah, that was just a little tiny bit of the research. But then there's also research on characters and what's the day-to-day life of a priest, what's the day-to-day life of an exorcist, what's the day-to-day life of a psychiatrist, how do people get committed, how long are they able to be committed for, what's the legal part of this. So there was just to make sure I got everything right. I wanted to tell a good story, and I wanted to tell the story that people could believe in and trust. So that way, I mean, there was, hours and days and weeks and months of research done even before I even started writing.
My gosh. I mean, I appreciate your authenticity and wanting to make the story spot on as much as possible, albeit fiction. But did you know how the story was going to go? And you said you researched this beforehand, but did you know, all right, we're going to have a priest. We need the psychiatrist. We've got, these different elements going there. Did you have that all fleshed out and then you researched it, or you just kind of put your toe in the water and like, you know what? I'm going to add a priest to it. Gotta check in, and do a little research there.
That's exactly the second way you said is exactly how it happened. Once I started writing and thinking about it and going through the creative process, you start to realize what you need. And of course, whenever you write, you have your first initial ideas for a book. It's never the same as how it ends up. And I had this very flashy ending originally, and then it didn't work. So that's where sort of coming back to what we were talking about a second ago made a heck of a lot more sense than going that way.
What was the hardest thing to research?
The exorcism, the demonology piece. It's sort of, just I'm a regular Catholic guy, so it leads to a lot of late nights thinking about things. And the scariest thing that has ever happened to me was I had been spending a lot of time researching, demons and demons throughout history. And it was about 1 o'clock in the morning. I went to bed and I was thinking about the book, and I was just about to fall asleep. And this voice comes and it says, "So you think I wouldn't know?" And it was probably me just still thinking about the book. But I snapped straight up, and that kind of got my attention here. So you're not just writing a book to entertain people. You're writing a book that's got some depth to it. And, did I really hear a voice? I was probably dreaming. But if I wasn't, what does that imply? And that was the most difficult thing I had to deal with.
How do you know that it wasn't a voice?
I prefer to think it wasn't. I
Okay.
didn't want the devil talking to me. You know what I mean? I didn't want anybody from that side of the aisle knowing what I was working on. I would prefer just to be, it was just a dream.
I got you. I'm not super
my kids
religious,
are convinced
but
it was real. My kids are convinced it was real.
I've seen things, experienced things. I'll laser this down, but to the point here, it was 18 years ago. My son needed surgery. Just found out sagittal stenosis. The skull fuses together as a baby, and there's now they put a helmet on the kid and do therapy. But back then, you got to pick a doctor who's going to cut your kid's head open. So I'm like, where do I go with this? What do I do? How do I pick a doctor? And the clock was ticking. He's 9 months old. They said, you got to get this done within the next couple of weeks. Like, how do you pick? So started going back to church, started praying. I'm driving back from New York City, saw a couple of doctors. It didn't make sense. And I'm just thinking, I'm like, all right, well, show me a sign. Here I am, show me a sign. Not more than 30 seconds later, I look at an overpass and there is a sign and it is a billboard and it says, Stephen, do I have your attention now? I didn't say anything. My kid was in the back, in the car seat. I'm driving. I'm like, didn't say a word. I just said, okay, all right.
Yeah.
Uh,
Yep.
everything. But you know what it was? It was a billboard for a TV show, I think on Court TV, where it was an ex talking to her ex, and she was trying to send him a message and was like a typewritten note on the billboard. If you Google
Uh,
it, billboard, Stephen will have attention now, you'll find it. But that was I got a sign, literally, and I picked a doctor a week later. Everything turns out fantastic. He's in his first year of college upstate, and everything's good. But I just want to share that because you never know. How do you know?
you don't, and it is. I think what it does, and maybe for you, but definitely for me, was it got my attention.
Got me
It
right,
got my
exactly.
attention. Um, don't mess around. Get it done right. And if you've got that kind of attention, maybe you're doing something right. And in your case, do we have your attention now? Yeah, we got this. You're covered. We're
Yep.
going to take care of you. I
Yeah.
love it.
It's almost just like, you're good. Yeah. And it turned out fantastic. Would you have changed anything in this story? Looking
Um,
back,
so I had to do major changes. The way it is now, no, I wouldn't change a thing. But the reason why it's good now is I trusted my editor a couple of years ago, and she suggested some major changes. And briefly, the novel was originally set in a high school, and it didn't quite work because of the depth of what the kids were talking about.
hmm,
And there was also some other books out about that time that covered that ground pretty well. And so we upaged the characters to early college. But what that meant was a 400-page book is all of a sudden 180 pages long, and you've just lost 220 pages. So that action of rewriting the book from that point made the book better, and I am so glad I did that because I
hmm.
trusted my editor. Her name is Heather Leeson. She's fantastic. Um, we talked all the time. We talked, during the heavy rewrites probably every single day, which isn't normal for an
Wow.
editor. But those changes that she had me make made the book what it is today.
Wow. And
Yeah.
Mark, when you got the book, and it was, well, take us through the stages when you first saw it. Was it a manuscript, but like what the beginning point?
So I always get them as manuscripts. And so we have them reviewed by one of our editors, one of our readers, and then we provide a one-page summary. So again, you can tell that the work that went into the book before I even saw it was astronomical. And that's something a lot of writers are afraid to do. I think we talked about once before, like an editor. The editor-writer relationship is intense and can be. And like Michael said, you got to trust. You got to trust that that person has your best interest in mind and that their advice is going to make the book better. A lot of writers, it's a sacred thing, their book. Don't touch it, don't move it, don't do anything to it, even that comma. I want it there forever and ever. And sometimes you have to understand that like you've written something, but it can be better. And then that
Hmm.
voice comes to you and says you need to rewrite it. So I got the manuscript. We do the formatting. And we put it together, and then we went back and forth on the cover. Michael had an image. We just worked around some of the text and some of the font choices, and I think that what we produce is an impressive book.
Hmm. It's the cover is simple in that, well, you describe it, Michael. How would you describe the cover?
It's a look into the Dale from above. Imagine yourself on a ridge and looking down into the Dale on an evening, just as the mist is coming off
Yeah.
the Quab in late summer.
Where'd
So
you where'd you find this picture? Is this one you had?
I had gone through a bunch of pictures, and I started working through Canva, and then that one really stuck out. And I looked through a couple of other ones, but that was the one that really, no matter which other picture I looked at, it wasn't as good as that one. And then really, as Mark said, it was really down to coming up with different fonts. I had an idea of what I wanted, and Mark went out of his way to find exactly what I wanted and format the book exactly the way I wanted it. And it just his work on this can't be overstated. It was just, it's one thing to have a good book, but the presentation is so important. And that's where, Mark helped me out with the cover. There's a couple other people that were working back and forth with me on the cover, but Mark really was a strong helper there, and the formatting was all him. So it was a fantastic job he did.
I believe that's the mark of a true professional when it looks easy, when it looks simple, but it's not. You could have went through 1,000 different fonts to nail this one. It's not the first one, but it looks like, well, yeah, that's because it all works. It all works beautifully. You get this like mystical, creepy kind of feeling looking at the cover, and even the Dale. If you don't know what the Dale is, it draws you in. I got to find out. Let me start flipping through. Let me figure this out for myself. Is this your first book, Michael?
It's the first book I've published. I had written a book about 10, 15 years ago, and I thought about reworking it, but it didn't work as a novel. So I learned a lot of things about structure and how to put a novel together. And that piece was sort of literary fiction, sort of highbrow literary fiction. And I did it, I tried it. And then what I really wanted to do is just tell a good story, take someone on a ride, and, at the end, leave them with some hope and in the world. So no, this is not this is definitely my first novel that was published, but not the first novel I wrote.
Do you have things going in your mind about what the second book might be?
The second book is already done, and I had to talk to my editor when I was recommended by some people in my writers group that had read the first novel that you got to write a follow up to this. And I'm like, no, I'm just writing one book. I'm an English teacher. I want to fish. I want to be on my boat all summer. And then I started writing, and then I got together with my editor and showed her what I had, and she loved it. And next thing you know, we had to do it's a tight little needle you have to go through to make a sequel to this book, because actually I can't give away. I almost gave away something really important, and I'm glad I did. But suffice to say that it's a tight lane you have to walk through to make a sequel to this book. And when I did that, it opened up a lot of doors for me. In the first book, you're sort of constrained to what you can do. But in the second book, it was a lot easier because the doors were wide open, because I couldn't go back to where I was.
Plus, you've already established the characters. You're already, lack of a better description, you're off and running. I have to imagine that the second, not that the first book wasn't fun, but the second book probably was even more fun.
Yeah, I wanted to write a barn burner. I wanted to write a book where it starts in the first sentence and keeps you running until the very last sentence, 350 pages later. Well, the first book is about someone trying to save their soul. The second book is about trying to prove to someone that they have a soul to save. So someone who doesn't want to believe. And it's essentially a chase. So it can be quite well.
We're just about out of time. Final question, Michael. English teacher, were you obsessed with grammar?
I am not.
All right.
I'm obsessed with writing and have my students just write. Grammar for me is a surface thing. It's something you do at the very end to make it look good. That's why we have editors. That's why we have proofreaders.
Gotcha. And just reinforces how editors are so important, and the whole process. Thank you for sharing it. Very cool. Very cool. Looking forward to the next book. Mark,
thank you.
Somebody's thinking about doing this. Best way to reach out to you. How do they do that?
You go to nfbpublishing.com. There's a simple form that starts the process.
Awesome. Mark and Michael, thank you. Thank you for being here today and walking us through this journey. Really appreciate it.
Thank you.
We'll be right back.
Broadcasting from the business capital of the world, this is the Podcast Business News Network.